The phone vibrated in Daniel Morales' pocket just as the engine coughed again. He didn't look at the screen. His hands were busy gripping the cracked steering wheel of his fishing boat, knuckles white, eyes locked on the grey water ahead. A half-empty paper cup of gas station coffee slid across the deck and tipped over, spilling cold liquid near his boots. That was when he saw it. A raft. Not far off. Drifting sideways with the slow, careless roll of the waves. Daniel squinted, heart thudding for reasons he didn't understand yet. He eased off the throttle, the boat slowing with a tired whine. Something about the raft made his chest tighten. He reached for his phone again, this time to silence it, and noticed the missed call was from his landlord. He let it ring out. Whatever was on that raft felt heavier than any debt waiting on shore. Daniel lived in a one-bedroom apartment in a fading coastal town outside Galveston, Texas. The paint on the buildings peeled in long strips, like the town itself was slowly shedding old skin. He'd grown up there, back when the docks were busy and people still believed the fishing industry would bounce back. Now, half the storefronts were empty, and the marina smelled more like rust than salt. At 39, Daniel's life had narrowed to routines. Wake before sunrise. Drink cheap coffee. Check the weather. Head out alone. Cast nets. Hope the engine held. Hope the catch was enough to cover fuel, groceries, and a fraction of what he owed. Some mornings, he still reached across the bed when he woke up, forgetting for a second that no one was there anymore. His ex-wife, Laura, had moved to Austin 3 years earlier. She said she needed space, but what she meant was stability. A future that didn't depend on tides and luck. Daniel didn't fight her when she left. He didn't know how to argue for a life that barely felt like it was holding together. The boat was old. Older than him. It had been his father's before it was his. The name, Maribel, was chipped and faded on the side. His dad had named it after Daniel's mother, who'd passed when Daniel was a teenager. Some days, being on the water felt like being close to both of them. Other days, it just reminded him of how much time had slipped away. Money was the loudest problem, but not the deepest. The deeper weight was the feeling that he'd stalled. That everyone else had moved forward while he stayed circling the same patch of ocean. Friends from high school posted pictures of backyard barbecues, kids in soccer uniforms, office promotions. Daniel muted most of them. Not out of jealousy, exactly. More like self-defense. That morning, the sky had been low and flat, clouds stretched thin like a dirty sheet. The forecast said calm seas, but the air felt uneasy. Daniel trusted his instincts more than apps. Still, he needed the money, so he went out. Fishing had been bad all week. The nets came up light, fish small and few. He checked the time and calculated numbers in his head. Fuel cost. Dock fees. Rent. The math never worked, no matter how many times he redid it. That was when the raft appeared. At first, he thought it was debris. The Gulf carried all kinds of junk. But as he drifted closer, he saw it was intact. Orange sides, sun-faded, with rope handles along the edges. Not a boat. Not exactly. More like something meant for emergencies. Daniel slowed to a crawl. The engine rattled in protest. He leaned over the side, peering at the raft as it bumped gently against his hull. It was heavier than he expected. Whatever was on it shifted slightly, making a dull sound that traveled up through the boat and into his chest. His first instinct was to ignore it. He had enough problems. The Coast Guard could deal with lost equipment. He told himself that as he stood there, watching the raft rise and fall. Then he noticed the cooler strapped to the center. Blue. Scratched. Sealed with thick plastic ties. He stared at it longer than he meant to. His mind jumped to worst-case scenarios, the kind you hear about on late-night news. He felt a flicker of fear, sharp and brief. Then something else followed. Curiosity. Responsibility. A sense that turning away would sit wrong in his gut for a long time. Daniel glanced at his phone again. Another missed call. Another voicemail he didn't want to hear. He sighed, rubbed a hand over his face, and grabbed the gaff hook. Pulling the raft alongside took effort. His shoulders burned. The boat rocked, and for a moment, he wondered if this was a mistake. If whatever was inside would bring more trouble than he could afford. But as the raft settled against Maribel, tied fast and no longer drifting, Daniel felt something unfamiliar cut through the heaviness he'd been carrying. Not hope. Not yet. Just the sense that his day, maybe his life, had tilted slightly off its usual path. He didn't open the cooler. Not right away. He sat down on the edge of the deck, breathing in the salt air, listening to the quiet slap of water against wood, and let himself feel the weight of the moment. Daniel didn't open the cooler out on the water. He didn't know why, exactly. Maybe it was superstition, or maybe he just didn't want to deal with one more unknown while the engine was still running and the boat was rocking beneath him. He tied the raft securely and headed back toward the marina, moving slower than usual, like he was carrying something fragile even though he hadn't touched it yet. Back at the dock, a couple of other fishermen glanced his way. One raised a hand. Daniel nodded back, kept his head down. He didn't mention the raft. It felt personal already, like something that didn't belong in casual conversation. At home, his apartment smelled faintly of old cooking oil and laundry detergent. He set the cooler on the small kitchen table, the one with the uneven leg he kept fixing with folded cardboard. Sunlight came in through the blinds in thin stripes. Dust floated in the air. Daniel stood there longer than necessary, staring at the cooler. His chest felt tight, the way it did right before opening overdue bills. He half expected the phone to ring again. It didn't. Finally, he took a pair of scissors from the drawer and cut through the plastic ties. The lid popped open with a dull snap. Inside wasn't what he expected. There was no money, no food, no drugs, no anything dramatic. Just a phone, wrapped carefully in a Ziploc bag. A small backpack. A folded note sealed in another bag. Daniel let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He picked up the phone first. It was an older smartphone, screen scratched but intact. When he pressed the power button, nothing happened. Dead battery. He set it aside and opened the backpack. Inside were a few personal things. A men's hoodie. A worn paperback novel. A small orange prescription bottle with a label rubbed almost completely off. The note was last. It was written in blocky handwriting, careful but rushed, like the person hadn't trusted their hands to stay steady. If you find this, please help. My name is Eric. I didn't mean for this to happen. That was it on the front. Daniel flipped it over. There was more. A phone number. A city. Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Daniel sat down heavily in the chair. He read the note again, slower this time. No details. No explanations. Just that sentence. I didn't mean for this to happen. He thought about calling the Coast Guard. That was probably what he was supposed to do. Report the raft. Hand everything over. Let someone else deal with it. But instead, he plugged the phone into his charger. The battery icon blinked on after a few seconds. The phone buzzed softly, like it was waking up from a long sleep. Notifications flooded the screen. Missed calls. Voicemails. Text messages stacked one on top of the other. Daniel felt like he was intruding, but he couldn't stop himself. He opened the most recent voicemail. A woman's voice filled the quiet apartment. Eric, it's Mom. Please call me back. I don't care what happened. We'll figure it out. I just need to know you're okay. Her voice cracked at the end. The message cut off. Daniel stared at the phone. He replayed it. Then another. Then another. Same voice. Same worry. Days apart. Getting more frantic each time. He leaned back, rubbed his eyes. This wasn't just lost property. This was someone's son. Someone who hadn't meant for things to go wrong and had anyway. The prescription bottle caught his eye again. Daniel picked it up and squinted at the label. Anti-anxiety medication. He didn't know much about it, but he knew enough to understand it mattered. His instinct was to pull away. This was too much. Too personal. He'd spent years keeping other people's problems at a distance because he barely had room for his own. But the woman's voice stayed with him. The way she said his name. The way she said we'll figure it out, like she was trying to convince both of them. Daniel picked up his phone and stared at the number written on the note. His thumb hovered over the screen. He imagined the conversation. Questions he couldn't answer. Expectations he couldn't meet. He set the phone down. Got up. Poured himself a glass of tap water. Drank it too fast. Then he sat back down and dialed. It rang 3 times. Hello. The woman's voice sounded smaller than it had on the voicemail. Daniel swallowed. Hi. My name is Daniel. I think I found something that belongs to your son. There was silence on the other end. Long enough that he thought the call had dropped. You found Eric, she said finally, her voice tight. I didn't find him, Daniel said quickly. I'm sorry. I found a raft. And his phone. I just wanted to let you know. The woman exhaled, a shaky sound. Thank you for calling, she said. Thank you so much. They talked for 20 minutes. About what Eric had been going through. About how he'd left without telling anyone. About how the ocean sometimes swallowed plans whole. Daniel didn't say much. He mostly listened. When they hung up, Daniel sat alone again, but the apartment didn't feel as quiet. For the first time in a long while, his problems didn't feel like the center of the world. They were still there. Still heavy. Still real. But now, they were sharing space with someone else's worry, someone else's hope. And that small shift made all the difference. After the call, Daniel didn't sleep much. He lay on his back staring at the water stain on his ceiling, the one shaped vaguely like Texas if you tilted your head and squinted. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the woman's voice again. Calm on the surface. Fractured underneath. He kept thinking about the sentence in the note. I didn't mean for this to happen. It felt familiar in a way he didn't like. The next few days passed in a strange blur. Daniel still went out on the water. Still cast his nets. Still came home with barely enough to justify the fuel. But everything felt slightly off, like his internal clock had shifted. He checked the phone from the raft more than he checked his own. He charged it fully. He didn't unlock anything he didn't need to, but he read the notifications that came through. Messages from friends. Missed calls from numbers with Louisiana area codes. No new ones from Eric. Daniel told himself that was good. That no news meant things were being handled by people better equipped than him. Still, the silence pressed on him. On the 4th day, his landlord finally cornered him outside the apartment building. A tall man with a polite smile that never quite reached his eyes. You're behind again, the landlord said, like he was stating the weather. I know, Daniel replied. He always said that. It was true and useless at the same time. You've got 2 weeks, the man said. I can't keep doing this. Daniel nodded. He waited for anger to rise, or panic. Instead, he felt tired. Bone-deep tired. Like the fight had slowly drained out of him over years, not weeks. That night, he sat at his kitchen table with the cooler open in front of him again, even though he already knew what was inside. He stared at the backpack, the hoodie folded neatly. He imagined Eric wearing it. Imagined him standing somewhere unfamiliar, pockets empty, head buzzing with thoughts he couldn't slow down. Daniel thought about his own breaking points. The day Laura packed her car and didn't cry. The day the bank denied his loan extension. The morning he realized he was avoiding phone calls because he couldn't stand explaining himself anymore. He'd never drifted out to sea on a raft. But he understood the feeling of wanting everything to stop, just for a while. The phone rang late, close to midnight. Daniel jumped, heart racing, then laughed quietly at himself. It was the number from Baton Rouge. He answered on the 2nd ring. Daniel, the woman said. This is Susan. Eric's mom. Yes, Daniel said. I remember. I didn't want to bother you again, she said. But, the Coast Guard asked if you'd be willing to talk to someone. Just about where you found the raft. Of course, Daniel said without hesitation. Anytime. After they hung up, he sat there in the quiet, the refrigerator humming softly behind him. He realized something uncomfortable then. This situation had given him purpose. Not in a dramatic way. Just enough to pull his attention outward instead of letting it fold back in on itself. And that scared him. Because purpose, once felt, made the emptiness harder to ignore when it left. The Coast Guard interview happened the next morning. It was straightforward. Coordinates. Time. Conditions. The officer thanked him for doing the right thing. Daniel nodded, unsure how to respond to praise that felt undeserved. When he got back to the dock, he sat in his boat longer than usual, watching the water. The sun reflected off the surface in broken pieces, never still long enough to settle. His phone buzzed. This time, it wasn't his landlord. It wasn't Susan. It was a text from the phone he'd been charging all week. Unknown number. Hi. This is Eric. My mom said you found my stuff. I didn't know who else to contact. Daniel stared at the screen. His pulse thudded in his ears. He typed. Deleted. Typed again. Yeah, he finally wrote. I did. I'm glad you reached out. There was a long pause. Daniel imagined Eric somewhere with bad reception, debating whether to keep going. Finally, another message appeared. I'm okay. I wasn't before. But I am now. Daniel exhaled slowly. He hadn't realized how much he needed to hear that. They didn't talk much. Just a few messages back and forth. Eric thanked him. Apologized for the trouble. Daniel told him it wasn't trouble. Because somehow, it wasn't. When the conversation ended, Daniel felt the familiar drop in his chest. The moment when something meaningful ends and leaves quiet behind. Only this time, the quiet didn't feel as empty. Still, reality didn't change overnight. Bills stayed unpaid. The boat still needed repairs. The future was still unclear. But Daniel understood something now. Avoiding connection hadn't protected him. It had just kept him stuck. The breaking point wasn't a single moment. It was the slow realization that he couldn't keep drifting, hoping something external would save him. He needed to choose differently. Even if the choice was small. Even if it scared him. Daniel didn't wake up with a plan. That surprised him. He'd expected the realization to come with a checklist, a clean turn toward something better. Instead, the morning arrived the same way it always did. Pale light through the blinds. The hum of traffic a few blocks away. His phone buzzing with a weather alert he already knew by heart. He lay there for a minute, listening to his own breathing, and noticed something subtle. The familiar knot in his chest was still there, but it wasn't as tight. It felt workable. Like a problem you could sit with instead of one you had to outrun. He got up, made coffee, and sat at the table. The cooler was gone. He'd returned everything to the Coast Guard the day before, including the phone. The kitchen looked oddly empty without it, like a guest had left behind an echo. Daniel opened his laptop, an old one with a fan that whined when it got tired. He hadn't updated his resume in years. He told himself he was between options, but the truth was simpler. He was afraid of seeing his life summarized on a single page. He started anyway. He didn't lie. He didn't dress things up. He wrote about the boat. About maintenance. About early mornings and long days. About handling equipment, logistics, weather decisions. He realized, slowly, that what he'd been doing all these years counted as skills, even if no one had ever called them that before. The phone rang around noon. Susan again. I just wanted to tell you, she said, Eric's home. He's safe. Daniel closed his eyes. I'm really glad. He asked me to thank you, she continued. He said you didn't judge him. That mattered more than you know. Daniel swallowed. I didn't do much. You answered the phone, she said gently. A lot of people don't. After the call, Daniel sat in silence for a long time. He thought about Eric, about that raft drifting without direction until it bumped into his boat by chance. He thought about how close he'd come to ignoring it. How easy it would have been to tell himself it wasn't his problem. The thought stayed with him when he went down to the marina later that afternoon. He talked to the dock manager, an older woman named Ruth who'd seen everyone come and go. You ever need help around here? Daniel asked, feeling awkward the moment the words left his mouth. Ruth looked him over. You looking to quit fishing? No, Daniel said. Just looking to stay afloat. She nodded like she understood exactly what he meant. I could use someone part-time. Maintenance. Helping new guys who don't know which end of a wrench to hold. Daniel smiled. It wasn't a big offer. It wasn't a miracle. But it was real. The weeks that followed didn't transform his life. Not in any dramatic way. He still fished. He still struggled. Some nights, he still lay awake thinking about Laura, about the years he couldn't get back. But he worked at the marina 2 afternoons a week. The extra money eased the pressure just enough to breathe. He fixed his resume. He sent it out. Most places didn't respond. One did. It was a small shipping company near the port. They needed someone reliable. Someone who understood the water. Someone who showed up. The interview was short. Practical. No grand speeches. When the manager shook his hand and said, "We'll give you a shot," Daniel felt something shift again. Not joy. Not relief exactly. Respect. For himself. On his first day, he packed lunch instead of buying gas station food. He noticed that detail later and smiled at it. Small changes added up quietly when you let them. One evening, months later, Daniel took Maribel out after work. Not to fish. Just to be on the water. The sun dipped low, turning everything gold and uneven. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hey. It's Eric. Just wanted to say I'm doing better. Therapy's helping. Got a job. Hope you're well." Daniel stared at the message, then typed back, "Glad to hear it. Take care of yourself." He put the phone away and watched the horizon. The water moved the way it always had. Unpredictable. Honest. Daniel understood something now that he hadn't before. Life didn't change because of one big moment. It changed because of what you chose to do after that moment passed. He hadn't been saved by what was on the raft. He'd been changed by the choice to care. As the boat drifted gently, Daniel let that thought settle. Somewhere between the past he couldn't fix and the future he couldn't see clearly, he'd found a steadier place to stand. And that, he realized, was enough to start with.